things really start getting kind of hidden, although they were kind of hidden before, but now they really start getting hidden. Anyway, I'm not familiar with the cultural impact in Yugoslavia, but I'm fairly sure it's very significant.
Well, what can I say? This will be the final episode, I hope, because I don't really want to spend too much time on this.
I agree.
For me, it's a very depressing episode. For pro Tito crowd, it's a very nice episode, but
yeah, well, it's pretty much the crowning achievement for the Tito crew.
Yeah. So we left off in end of 1943, start of 1944.
Yeah, I did have a quick question for you on that, though. So we did go over Italy to some detail, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So did we talk about? We also talked about kind of how the Italian collapse benefited each side, because I think Tito was pretty much a big winner in that whole mess. But we talked about that already.
Yeah, I think so, because ultimately Tito was the big benefactor of Western Allied support. That's the main thing.
Yeah, he was. What an amazing feat he pulled. Actually, pretty much pulled him from the brink of destruction after the battle around Neretva River to king of Yugoslavia, in essence, which is kind of weird how he pulled that off, but yeah. Anyway.
Well, he had help. That's the main thing. Yugoslavia is yes. Yugoslavia is a smallish, middling country, and any kind of foreign help really matters a lot. So, so we are at this moment. There is a great realignment, so to say. Mm-hmm. On one hand, the Western Allies have, for all intents and purposes, now declared war on the Chetniks, and now are supporting. They're supporting regime change in Yugoslavia and helping Tito. So Tito and Western Allies are now allies. They support each other.
Weird.
I don't know how much at that point the Western Allies realized that Tito is ultimately a communist and obviously working for Stalin at that point, but nevertheless, they support Tito.
Realistically, I get the impression Americans weren't really paying any attention. And this is the part where the conspiracy theory kind of kicks in. I don't know how much the communist spies in the English government actually hid all that stuff from the English. I have no idea, but it seems really suspicious that maybe they kind of underplayed Tito's Stalinist leanings to the English, because the English were the ones that were really heavy supporting Tito from the Western Allies' perspective, because I don't think the U.S. was even paying any attention. I don't get the feeling they were even looking at it at all.
Well, I'll be talking a little bit about the short episode on the U.S. here, but you're generally quite correct. This is not a theater that is very interesting to the U.S. They do, however, while the British leave Mihailovich and get all of their people to leave Mihailovich. However, the U.S. sends a mission to Mihailovich.
Oh.
And actually, this mission is interesting because of two things.
Okay.
So, as I said, there is a great realignment. The Partisans are now with the Western Allies, or more specifically with the British, while Chetniks and Germans try to realign. This is obviously not a real alliance, not a friendship, but then again, neither the Partisan-British relation is a real alliance, because ultimately the communists, they hate the British. So also the Serbs hate the Germans, meaning the Chetniks also hate the Germans, but this is necessity. You don't have any ammo. The Partisans are now flush with automatic weapons, with ammo, with equipment, with supplies, and obviously Chetniks can't can't possibly resist them unless they have some kind of German support.
Oh, so you actually think that at this point the Chetniks are mostly in the German camp? Well, they kind of have to be, really, because, like you said, they would not survive if they didn't have a sponsor at all. And the only one that would sponsor them at all would be Germany at this point.
Yes, they're actually trying to find a sponsor. There are two potential sponsors. One is Germany, which is extremely undesirable sponsor on many accounts, but nevertheless, they're there locally. The Germans killed tens of thousands of Serbs, tens of thousands of Mihailovic supporters. They tried to kill him and so on and so forth, but nevertheless, this is now a necessity. Otherwise, if you don't talk to the Germans, the communists will take over. They're as bad as the Germans, if not even worse. Also, there is another perspective, a hopeful American alliance, and this is the time when we talk a little bit about the mission Halyard, or the Halyard mission.
That's a curious one, but yeah, this is the time for that. So I'm assuming these guys were pilots that were bombing. I don't know what they were bombing besides Ploesti, but I'm assuming there's other targets that are around that area that they were just bombing. And then these are guys that wound up bailing out over Yugoslavia when their bombers were shot down or crippled or whatever, they crashed. So from what I've seen from the U.S. perspective, it looks like they really figured this was like a heavy Chetnik thing that they did, although I suspect both sides did it. I don't know. Is it a Chetnik thing or is it both sides doing Halyard?
It is both. Halyard is strictly Chetnik. And but Halyard. Both sides rescued Allied airmen.
Right.
Obviously.
Sure.
But for some reason, so there are two things that should be said. First of all, is that communist, pro-communist sources say that the communists rescued more airmen.
Oh, yeah.
And the other thing is, which does make sense, because obviously you have an ally in the communists and you're trying to land on their territory.
Right.
And the other thing is that the communists never got any kind of recognition for this by the Western allies.
Oh, really?
Yes. Ultimately, what will happen after the war, Mihailovic will get a Legion of Merit, I think, from President Truman.
Right.
And this is probably mostly based on the Halyard mission. And when you talk about the Halyard mission, this is something that is between the Americans and the Chetniks. Today, of course, it's between the Americans and Serb peasants, but it's today is much more complicated than was like 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah. Anyways, do they still do that? Do they still have like a ceremony or something in Serbia
each year?
Celebrating? Really?
Yeah. And
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, they think the American ambassador thanks unnamed Serbian farmers for this. Because, Serbian farmers just come up one day and decide to make an airstrip 8,000 of Serbian farmers self-organized, and they decide to make an airstrip and everything like that. And it's cringeworthy. Let's not talk about it. But nevertheless, So that's the whole point of the American mission. The American mission is with Mihailovic in order to rescue American airmen. While Mihailovic obviously he's a pro-allied, since day one. Yeah. So having an American mission is only common sense for him. Yeah. The other thing is that he's trying to make a more solid alliance with the Americans, but this will come up to nothing.
Right.
And actually, a third item that is interesting is that some Americans actually meet the Germans and start discussing whether the Germans should surrender to the Americans.
Really? In Yugoslavia?
Yeah, it's a bit of a scandal when this happens, and the American that actually did it, named Robert McDowell, I think he lands in prison for some time or whatnot. But yeah, I think he overstepped his authority a little bit. But nevertheless, he has a very interesting take on this. He is lambasted as being pro-Chetnik, whatever, but he said that the only force that actually fought the Germans was the Chetniks. And I'm going to say that he is the wisest person from the West that participated in the war. Anyways, because of all the things that I said in the previous episodes, I think that McDowell is quite correct on his take. Notwithstanding the fact that at that point Germans and Chetniks were collaborating with each other.
Well, they kind of have to, because they're all getting destroyed. So it's like, we need to stop these guys.
Exactly.
So is this pre-Russian invasion?
There's another thing about that Chetnik collaboration. This collaboration is done in order to get the partisans off their backs.
Right.
If the Chetniks and the Germans are truly collaborating, the Chetniks would give over the Allied airmen to the Germans. For one thing.
Wow, that's a good point.
That's the least.
That would just be, okay.
That's the least that they would do.
Yeah,
at least give them the British airmen.
Wouldn't that be ironic? Here, we'll keep the Americans. You can have the British ones.
Yeah, that would be completely fair, but because the British are because the British are now enemies of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia.
Yeah, pretty much. Actually, yeah.
So, and ultimately, when the Red Army comes in, the Chetnik units collaborate with the Red Army against the Germans.
Really?
Of course.
Wow. I mean, that's a tough one. So what, the Russians would support that? Yeah, I guess they would, because it's another force that's fighting the Germans, because the Russians just want to get rid of the Germans, and I'm assuming that helping Tito is just a bonus / a secondary thing.
Well, I think it might be even relatively primary, because ultimately, of course, this collaboration between the Chetniks and the Soviets lasts for like a week or two. Nothing spectacular there. But obviously,
it's not going to be much.
You got to ask yourself the question: what would happen if, for instance, the Western Allies landed in Yugoslavia? Now, I understand from some Americans that they think that Tito would join the Western Allies while the Chetniks would join the Germans.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about that viewpoint. I think that's. Oof.
It seems a bit far-fetched to me at first brush. Like, why would you do that? But the trouble is, the Chetniks can't really line up with the British at that point, because they pretty much stabbed them in the back for the most part. So it would really kind of depend upon which Western ally was the lead on this invasion. If it was the U.S. leading, then the Chetniks would probably line up with the U.S. If it's the British doing the lead, then it's like, why would the Chetniks ever line up with the British?
Well, it depends. But obviously it would be an Anglo-American landing, and obviously because the Americans would be there, the Chetniks will be expecting that the Americans will bring back democracy, and obviously this means that the Chetniks would be cooperating with the Americans. But nevertheless,
interesting.
Some people decided that they hate the Chetniks so they can believe anything they really want. Honestly, it's a no-brainer at that point.
Yeah.
But to get back on what happened is, so on one hand, the Chetniks are working with the Germans when they need to fight the Partisans. The Partisans are not allies. They're a local local terrorist group that needs to be fought this way or the other. And since there is a danger that the Partisans will take over the Yugoslavia after the war, they are the primary enemy because the Germans are leaving and the Partisans are staying. On the other hand, if the allies, the actual allies, come into the equation, in that case, the Chetniks will cooperate with the actual allies. So that's the Chetnik position in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's a. Now I'm actually, when you say it that way, I'm surprised the Chetniks lasted as long as they did, really. But I mean, I guess it wasn't until late 43, 44 that Yugoslavia became like super militarized, or there's like a bunch of units fighting in the country all the time. Because before then, it was just kind of like it was a guerrilla war that occasionally would spawn up into some like military operations, but it wasn't like there was a ton of troops in the area. Well, except for the Italians.
Look at it this way. I would have to disagree at this point because, for instance, at the start of 1943, a German report on Chetniks is they think that there are 150,000 Chetniks.
What?
And German reports on the Partisans, when we extrapolate the Soviet Republic and the additional units, there's certainly half of as many Partisans. So we can assume that there are 250,000 guerrillas.
Wow, that's a lot.
250. So anywhere from 200,000 to 250,000 guerrillas already at the start of 1943.
You know, it's funny. Normally, I wouldn't believe those numbers. Like most of the times, if I read that, but in this case, I actually think those numbers are right because there was a lot of guerrillas, and actually, it probably really was 250,000, which is a ton for a country that small.
Yes. However, what the problem is with the Western public is that they do not understand that the half or more of that number were Chetniks. And actually, when you look actual numbers of the units and things like that, it can even be assumed that the Chetniks had numerical advantage well into 1944 until the king's speech in September.
I was going to ask you about that. Let's talk about that, shall we? September 44.
Yes. So you asked about the king's speech in September 1944.
Yes, that's really pivotal right there, that moment.
It is. You're completely correct. That might have determined the end of the war, might not, but it was hugely important.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because the king, the young king, under pressure from Churchill, made a public speech where he told the Chetniks to leave Mihailovich and join Tito.
Oof. That's
it's lights out.
Yeah, that's pretty much the end right there.
Yes, this is a huge legitimacy loss, huge, and Mihailovich, of course, never recovered from this.
Oh, he can't. You don't recover from that.
Ultimately, the king, I think, rescinded his speech or something like that. It doesn't matter because at that point, when he did it, Tito, Red Army came in, the Chetniks collapsed, and Tito was installed in Serbia.
Oh, you know what? I always wonder how that transition happened. That actually makes sense. So these are all kind of like bang, 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 like probably in the span of like a month or two, all this happened, right?
Well, ultimately, Tito was trying to come into Serbia to defeat the Chetniks from the beginning of 1944.
Right.
But he was not successful, obviously.
Yeah, well, when they had the speech, it was like a super gift. It's like, oh, great! Now I'm like the super. Well, you basically crowned Tito king at that point, in essence.
Yes. Yes, he crowned Tito king, and on the other hand, the Soviets came in at that point. So the Chetniks collapsed, the Soviets and the Bulgarians defeated the Germans, and Tito was installed as the controller of Serbia. Now, of course, he mass mobilized.
Sure.
And on the other hand, he mass murdered people.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fight regarding how many people he actually killed. Who were these people?
Significant.
We're talking about tens of thousands easily.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know if he picked out any ethnicity in particular, but certainly he assassinated his political opponents.
Yes, he picked out the Germans and he picked out the Italians.
Yeah, and I'm sure he didn't do the Croats any favors. Or rather, he didn't do them any favors.
I have to be honest with you. I disagree with that.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, tell me your point then.
The Croats far right is angry with Tito because he killed a number of Ustaše and Home Guard POWs.
Okay.
There were actually a huge number of Croat Ustaše and Home Guards that actually tried to retreat from Croatia.
Were these the guys that tried to retreat into Italy or Austria?
The guys that tried to retreat into Italy were pro-Allied, like Chetniks and some other people that managed to, how should I say, join the Chetniks at the last minute in order to, skip. However, the pro-Axis forces wanted to retreat to Austria.
Oh, interesting. So they were kind of in the same area then, more or less.
Yes, and now what happens is that these people are given over by the British, are given over to Tito.
Oh boy.
Yes.
The British is like Santa Claus to Tito, just keep giving him gifts over and over again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're the instrumental part of him coming into power. If there were no British support, I'm not sure that he would ever see Belgrade.
Yeah, it's actually funny you put it that way, because they got huge material support, they got political support, and then the British actually gave him political prisoners that Tito wanted to get rid of. So, yeah, I don't think Tito would have won if not for Britain. Ooh, that's controversial. Well, no, not really.
For the people that follow Chetnik stories and know what happened and follow the accounts and things, for me it's a non-controversial thing. For the pro Tito crowd it is, but honestly, without the British support in particular, Tito was gone by the Battle of Sutjeska or the Schwarz Offensive. He was basically destroyed there.
Actually, yeah, that would have killed him right there, because at that point he was like a thin shell of his former self, and he didn't have any sort of way to regain strength at all at that point, because that was, well, I guess they got a little bit of bump from Italy, but they got a lot more bump from England. Yeah. Wow.
Well, he got the bump. The bump related to Italy was that the Western Allies told the Italians to join the Partisans.
Oh, really?
Which the Italians wouldn't actually do. They mostly ran away, but they left a lot of their equipment to the Partisans. Had the Italians, on the other hand, been told to join the Chetniks, I would wager that would be far more successful. But this is hypothetical things, and we don't want to go there too much. So,
there's no point in that.
Yeah. So there's the huge factor is Western Allied propaganda support. This is absolutely huge, and for for the pro-communists and a lot of Serbs, a huge factor is support by the Soviet Union, which
Yeah.
is seen as Russia.
Right. Well, yeah.
Well, maybe not, but let's not go there. Anyways,
Yeah.
anyways, so Tito had the foreign backing, which allowed him to come into power, and of course he got rid of the political opponents. I don't think that anybody cares how brutal he was or
Not
what
really.
he did. Yeah, obviously. But if I need to be rude, I would wish to do these people that like Tito to have a Tito of their own in their own country. But this would be too much. I'm not going to say that.
No, the other thing you have to do, and we'll just kind of jump out of this situation in particular, if you just look at what communist regimes do in every country they're ever in, and you just kind of look at the numbers, you look at Vietnam, you look at China, you look at Soviet Union, you look at all Eastern Europe, it's not a great leap to imagine the same thing happen inside of Yugoslavia. So it's like, regardless of what you think about everything else, just watch what these guys did in the 20 or so other countries they visited. It's rare that you go in there, communist regime comes in, everything's all peaceful, hunky-dory, and everybody's living a happy life. You just never hear stories like that. It's always like you're repressing people, you're killing people, you're destroying the economy. Why would you think this would be any different in Yugoslavia? Just look at the record.
Ultimately, the best thing the communist regimes ever did was to leave communism and, go on to capitalism. But they will need a couple of decades to find that out.
I'll give the Yugoslavians some credit. At least they slightly transitioned from that at some point, so they were sort of ahead of the game. But that's a whole different topic, and not really what we're talking about here. I do have a question for you. I want to revisit something real quick. Yeah. So one of the things that the Western allies kind of hang their hat on is this sort of sabotage campaign that was going on inside of Yugoslavia, basically 43 to 44. Do you think Tito's partisans participated in that much, or did they do just enough to maybe kind of get some creds and kind of go on about their business? Because it seemed to me like it was a really heavy Chetnik operation where the Chetniks would actually blow up the railroads and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know if Tito actually participated in that or not. I can't tell.
For 1942, 1943, it was mostly the Chetniks. 1943, 1944, it's mostly the Partisans.
Oh, so they did participate.
Of course they did. They had to. I think that they even made a big showy destruction of some railway juncture or whatever in Slovenia. Yeah. But ultimately, it's of course they're supposed to do that, because obviously you're not going to get all this ammo and all this close air support for nothing.
Because that's kind of what the Western allies are really hanging their hat on. I don't really have no idea how effective that really was, but considering, I'm going to guess a lot of the Romanian oil probably came through Yugoslavia, it probably really stopped or slowed down a lot of that shipment, but I have no way of judging how effective the campaign was. They sure talk about it a lot, but I don't know if it really did much.
That's nice. That's the sabotage is something that is, I guess, more important to the Western sources and Western public than it is here locally. I'm sure that the Partisans also sabotaged the Germans. Of course, I would consider the Chetnik sabotage from 1942 more important than the sabotage from 1944, because by 1944 it was very clear what's going to happen with the war. So,
and not to mention the fact the Russians were starting to capture everything that was important there anyway, so the Germans had really nothing to ship. The only thing they had left was their troops in Greece, so they had to keep the supply lines open to Greece to get their troops out. That's about it.
It's for the Western allies. It's very interesting that, of course, the Partisans need to do sabotage on the behest of Western allies. That's the least thing that they can do, literally, because sabotage sabotage is in itself, it's not a overly huge deal.
No,
It's a
not
huge
really.
deal when you need to make an offensive in order to blow up a bridge.
Right.
However, when you look at Tito's orders, which were given to his underlings, his subordinates, it's we need to attack Draža, meaning Mihailović.
Right.
That's the most important thing, because this will decide the fate of Yugoslavia. And when you see where his mobile troops are located, they're of course located to protect him personally, and
Yeah.
then sent over in the direction of Serbia in order to take over Serbia.
Oh, interesting. Well,
So-
I've never seen that topic covered in the game, like ever.
Yeah, it's. I think that the Western public has made a picture of Tito according to their own preferences and liking.
Yeah, of
And-
course.
And obviously, the Western public obviously also does not have all the information, because I'm very suspicious that any one of them actually knows how to read Serbian. And
Oh, I'm
has,
sure
you
almost
know-
none of them do.
there you go. We have the collection of the reports done by the communists.
Oh. That has not been translated, has it? I don't know why it would be.
I'm
You-
very doubtful that it is, because
Yeah,
When I
I'd be
see-
stunned.
when I see the Western resources and the Western books, it's very patchy. Some of them are, of course, misleading, such as the books by, how's that, the Croatian guy name?
You talking about the British guy, McLean?
No, McLean is obviously, he's ridiculous. I mean, obviously he's going to put himself and the British in the best light. He's
Boy.
I wouldn't call him. We read his report. The
Yeah.
partisans kill 5 Germans for every partisan killed. I mean, how serious could this guy be? There's, I don't know. I even forgot his name and last name. The Croatian guy that wrote the book on the war in Yugoslavia, that tried to be the definitive English book on the Chetniks,
Oh,
which
I
is
probably read that book. It's not Tito's second or third in command, is it?
no. He's a emigre, but he worked with the Yugoslav government here, the communist government, in order to prepare his book. And
boy.
I mean, you
Boy.
can read his book, but be very careful. On the other
Yeah,
hand, we have people that are pro-Chetnik. For instance, I find David Martin very interesting. I don't know about the thesis on why the British supported the communists. There could be all kinds of different answers. There's a lot of fishy things that come up with this, because a lot of people try to explain this. I don't ultimately care.
No, I mean it's a done deal at this point. You can't really change what happened. It just you'd kind of like to know why.
Yeah, you can try to explain why, but honestly, I don't even care, because when I look at, for instance, the last 200 years of history, I see that the Serbs and the British were allies only once.
Yeah, World War I.
Exactly. And
that's
the
it.
Serbs, the Serbs, I think, read too much into this, and they decided that the British are their allies, which is not the case, was not the case before that. It's not the case now. It was not the case, So why would the British support a communist? Perhaps because he was a Croat, or perhaps because they decided that he would give them more than Mihailović would, or perhaps that they decided that he doesn't care if people are killed by the Germans.
I think part of the issue is kind of like I don't know, they used to have a term for the military, like field expedient thing that you do. You just do something because you want to create something that looks like it benefits you. So by having an insurgency behind German lines, it somewhat benefits you because the Germans have to pay attention to this thing. So you support the insurgency to distract the Germans from somewhere else. I mean, that's my base thought on this.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine. But
Yeah.
there are a couple of arguments that need to be said why this is bunk. Because
Okay.
if you have this kind of a mindset, first of all, that tells a lot of bad things about you. You're not a reliable ally.
Well,
If
no.
you decided that the Serbs or the Yugoslav army, the King's army, who's your ally, who has declared for you and brought Yugoslavia more or less into the war on your side, if you decide that they should be punished because they're not doing enough, frankly, there's a lot of bad things that I can say about your morals.
Yeah.
And other thing is, they did not do this in Denmark, Norway, Netherlands. Why didn't they support the communists there? Because the communists would be obviously eager to fight. Why didn't they try to instigate a revolt there? Because a revolt makes perfectly zero sense militarily. But obviously they want to fight the war by getting other people killed.
Well, yeah, that's kind of one of the benefits of a war if you're on the side that isn't losing a ton of people.
That's a valid explanation, but it tells a lot of bad things about them. Now, the Serbs were foolish because they did not realize who they were dealing with. They realized who they were dealing with as in relation to Germany. A lot of them in relation to the Soviet Union, but they did not realize who they were dealing with in relation to Britain.
Oh, that's true. So they still kind of had that, for lack of a better term, the World War I honeymoon, where the British really helped them out significantly and actually helped them regain their country to a certain point by the war's end. They must have thought it was still that England that was helping them out in World War II.
And they helped England in World War II. They themselves, because they overthrew the government, the Yugoslav government, which was being relatively reasonable in joining the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy, because there was no other choice.
Not really, no. Because you were going to get invaded, which you did get invaded.
Yes. So the Serbs decided that they want none of this, that this would be a betrayal of their allies, and the war ended with them being betrayed by their allies. So, as you can see, no good deed will end unpunished.
Yeah, so in essence, the British became just like all the other Balkan political parties. They had very duplicitous things going on. Oh, man.
It's very interesting that one of the things that was a very great benefit to Tito is that he treated the British more or less as his enemies. And because of that, he was on high alert, always on high alert when he talked to them. He was obviously consciously trying to manipulate them.
Oh, yeah.
And he was successful. Well, on the other hand, Mihailovich made the same error as the Serbs, and he actually thought that the British were allies, but he started slowly being disillusioned as time passed, but by then it was too late.
Yeah, and then that speech just kind of knocked whatever wind that he had left in his sails. That was just lights out at that point when the speech
exactly.
You know what? That's probably a good spot to stop because anything beyond this is just going to be unpleasant and ugly from here on out. So I think we get the gist that Tito then took the upper hand and took the opportunity to clear out a lot of his political opponents, which actually served him pretty well because he wound up ruling Yugoslavia for the next 40 years, basically.
Yes,
Not
Tito
quite,
was the
35 years.
ultimate Machiavellian in
Yeah.
in that he killed as many people as he thought expedient. He actually, there's some people that think that Yugoslavia's economy was functioning under Tito. Honestly, I would be there's some claims that Yugoslavia more or less had a shadow or a semi bankruptcy in like 1981, 2 or 3, just after Tito died. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to sing any praises to what he did to Yugoslavia, because ultimately I think if the king remained in power, if it was still the kingdom of Yugoslavia, we would have turned out better. But Yugoslavia has its own problems. Obviously, what happened with the Ustaše and what they did, obviously, more or less made Yugoslavia impossible.
Yeah, that's a whole different subject. I don't think we're going to be talking about that one too much.
No.
All right, so that's probably a good capstone for our first part of the work here. So I think our next thing, we need to start cracking into your game. If you have like a idea how you want to present that, we can kind of noodle through that and do that for our next session. Just start
Perfect.
how you represented this in a game. And actually, what'll be fun, I don't know how many episodes we're going to do on that. Probably at least 2, probably 3 or so. But I'm thinking then we could kind of switch to what I've been modeling. We can kind of compare and contrast our models just to see different ways of kind of slicing this issue up, because there's all sorts of ways you can cover this topic. It's actually a rich topic from a game perspective. There's a lot of ways to do this.
Yes, we can do a whole strategy game on the whole war, and we can do games on specific episodes. I actually have both.
I noticed that.
Yeah, I have that big strategy game on the whole war, and we'll talk about this in the next episode. And I also have a on one relatively smallish. It's like 5,000 or 6,000 insurgents against 3,000 Germans. A siege in 1941 in Serbia.
Oh yeah, we could talk about all this. All right. Well, however you want to start with. I'm assuming you want to start with your big game, because that's probably a good way to do it, because we kind of touch on these topics, and then if you look at the game, a lot of stuff that you did makes a lot more sense. You can kind of see why you're emphasizing this point over that point, and it's actually a really good thing to jump into next. We'll just start talking about yours. We'll let you go now because I know it's pretty late for you, and I kind of have to do things around the house here. But a good talk as always, my friend.
Thanks a lot. And I hope to hear from you next week.
Oh, I'll be back. We've got more to talk about. Have a great evening.
And thanks a lot. All the best, Betty. Bye-bye.
Bye.